then as people arrive. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you all to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we take a candid look at the experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian and ethnic minority experiences. And this week, I know I say this every week, but this week we really do have a gem with us this afternoon, because we've got Maisie Barrett. Maisie Barrett is an author and she contributed to the BBC's documentary Subnormal, a British Scandal. But I'm not going to steal her thunder. I'm going to let Maisie tell her story. But I really want to say, Maisie, a big thank you for joining us this afternoon. And I'm going to start with the question, which I always start with, which is, can you tell me a little bit about your early childhood and where you gained your sense of belonging, your sense of identity when you were growing up?
Well, first of all, I'm honoured to be here with you. To answer that question, I think in the 60s, when Caribbeans began to migrate to England, and my father's house was used for, they actually used my father's address to come to this country. And so we had a lot of people from Jamaica coming to our house, passing through before eventually getting their own place. And so every room, my father bought a 6-bedroom house in Leeds, and every room in that house, apart from his room, obviously, and mine, was rented out. Mm-hmm. To people from the Caribbean and people from Africa. Mm-hmm. So his room was used as a living room, and that is where he used to entertain his friends over a bottle of whiskey and my mother's nice Jamaican meals. Mm-hmm. And he always used to talk about African history. I used to sit there, if I wasn't playing out, I'd be there listening to my dad talking about African history, how we were the first to rule the world, and one day we will get that respect and the power like what we used to have before. Mm-hmm. And through my dad's historical teachings, I got to appreciate myself as a Black person living in this country. And as I got older in my 20s, I became obsessed with going to Africa one day, living and taking my children mm-hmm. with me. So that is where, and I was always proud of my identity, being a Black child, because of my father, and also because I was raised in an era where Black people from all over the world were very happy to wear to have their natural Afro hair as big as they could, and songs were being sung about, going back to Africa, and Black is beautiful. So I was brought up in that era where I was hearing these positive sayings, and so therefore I was proud to be Black and to be living in this country. But I knew one day that I wanted to go live in Africa. Yeah.
Right. So it was kind of like in your father's living room. Your house was kind of the a passageway into the UK, as it were. Yes. So people from Jamaica or wherever would use your father's address to say, this is where we're going to be staying. And then they would move on. But by hearing the stories, that mm-hmm. really helped you to identify who you were as an individual, as a young Black girl growing up.
Yes.
So I just wanted to, so at home, you were proud of your Blackness, definitely mm-hmm. proud of your Blackness. Yes. What about when you were at school? How was it kind of like elsewhere in school, etc.?
You know, I know a lot of children in my time and even in these days experience racism in school.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I didn't experience, I can't remember being called a nigger or names at school.
Mm-hmm.
But what I was going through, I didn't know at the time. It was indirect racism.
Mm-hmm.
To do with the education system and politics and all of
Mm-hmm.
that. And I was just a little child, so
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be aware of all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's go back in time now.
Mm-hmm.
We've gone through slavery. We fought the First War, helped to fight the First World War. We fought
Mm-hmm.
the Second World War. And now England is in economical crisis. So they asked our parents from the Caribbean to come help
Mm-hmm.
us rebuild. And of course, you know, we always run to the rescue. They come to this country in the late 40s, throughout the 50s and 60s, thinking that, you know, believing that there are Black English people. They came
Mm-hmm.
in their nice suits, nice dresses.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking that they would be greeted in a calm way because
Mm-hmm.
there are English people, Black English people.
Mm-hmm.
In the Caribbean, in Jamaica, the children were educated and their exam papers were marked in England, and many of them had very good results.
Yeah.
So they came here with their, you know, different families came here with all their hopes and expectations.
Yeah.
But one of the expectation was that their children would be educated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So they trust the system because obviously in Jamaica, they, you know, they marked their papers and they didn't give them, you know, E's and D's. I gave them a good marks, not knowing that there was an agenda to put their children in schools for children who couldn't learn, who didn't have the ability to learn. Their average, their intelligence was below average.
Yeah.
So they chose a few Black children here and there all over the country,
Mm-hmm.
and they placed them into these schools. And that is my story. That is what happened. That happened to me when I was about 6 years old. I started school at 5, obviously. And by the time I was 6, I found myself in one of these schools. Now, in the mainstream school that I went to, I can remember reciting my times table, and doing other activities. And there must have been some structure.
Yeah.
So it was a mainstream school, but when I went to the special school, I must have noticed that there wasn't any structure, because if I didn't want to play outside, I would just tell my teacher, "Oh, teacher, I don't want to go outside today," and I could stay in. And whilst I was there, I would put on a show. I would write. I couldn't read or write, but I was a visual person, and I would put on a show in my head, and devise this play. And when the children came in, all the chairs were laid out. They all sat down. Teachers sat down. They weren't going to do anything else. There was no subjects or anything to be taught. So I would entertain them through using puppets, put on a show for as long as I want, because nothing else was going to happen, because they didn't have a structure where they taught you lessons. So they didn't teach you maths, English, geography. They didn't teach you anything like that. I mean, I was just 6 years old. They wouldn't teach me that way, but they would, in infant school, there is some structure. But there wasn't any structure at all. I could do what I want. I used to call it a free school. From there, I moved on to junior school, the same thing. So basically, when I left school, I wasn't taught anything. Basically, when I left school, I couldn't read or write. But whilst I was in this school, there was talk about, you know, among the Black community that their children were not amounting to anything. They weren't learning anything.
Yeah.
And as you know, a guy called Bernard, you know, did his investigation and realized that we were actually put in these schools because we were Black.
Yeah.
Okay. And so eventually my mother now met up with a Black educational psychologist, and she did an assessment with me.
Yeah.
A real assessment.
Yeah.
And concluded that I was intelligent. The first assessment I had back in the mainstream school, all that the teacher did was just ask me, gave me something in my hand. I can't remember what I was carrying, told me to open the door, go downstairs, come back up. And on that conclusion, after that, she concluded that I was a backward child. So eventually I went to this school. But when I got the assessment from the Black educational psychologist, that assessment was very similar to the one I had when I went to uni to study. And they did a dyslexia assessment on me and discovered that I was dyslexic.
So let me just clarify, just to make sure that I've heard. So the assessment that when you took when you were 6 years old, or as far as you didn't know it was an assessment, but it turned out to be one, was that they gave you some books or something, which they then gave you a series of commands.
Which I probably forgot because I'm dyslexic.
Right. And then when you didn't pass it, they just labeled you as being backwards and you need to go to a special school.
Yes.
And they used to call these schools
SEN schools.
SEN schools. Yeah.
And backward schools and all kinds of names were associated with these schools. Yeah. And those names stuck on me and stuck on many of us. Yeah. So we didn't get the respect from anybody, from our families, you know, didn't go to these schools. I mean, extended families, and from neighbors, from friends. You know, we were seen as the stupid, backward people.
Yeah. So so you then go on to say, you then said that you, at the age, was it about 13 or so, you went back into mainstream school? So for 7
girls'
years,
high school.
For 7 years you had been in this special school, and now you were going into age 13, so just about when you were going to be doing your O-levels, CSCs and stuff, and then expected to be operating at the same level as other children who had been taught, because as you said, it was a free school. You were making your curriculum up as you were going along, as it were.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So how, I don't need to really ask, but I am going to ask that question. How was that for you then, going back into the mainstream school after having not really been able to have, not being taught for 7 years, really?
I didn't know what was expected of me.
Yeah.
I went to school, went into my class, and I was being taught subjects and hearing these names for the first time: maths, English, history, geography. I'm hearing these names for the first time. I'm being taught them, but I can't write. Yeah. I couldn't write. I couldn't study. I wasn't trained to study, because at school they train you. You learn many skills. If you go to a proper school, it's not just the subjects, but you will learn so many skills in order to survive in society, in order to go on to further education or get a job and communicate and work in a working environment. I wasn't taught all of this, and when I was in school, I didn't experience any kind of bullying in my special school. But when I went to the mainstream school, I noticed that children saw me in a different way, because I was different. I was speaking different. I couldn't read, I couldn't write, I couldn't communicate. And I was very defensive, very argumentative. If they dare put me down, I would tell them off and I would be ready to fight. You know, so eventually I was being bullied at school, but I wouldn't allow it to happen. And because even though they put me into the lowest school, those children still had more ability than I did to learn. At that point, they knew about history, geography, and all of that, and they could listen and understand and write things down, but I couldn't. So I became a target of bullying in my school, and it's never stopped. It's never stopped. Yeah, throughout my life. And obviously I couldn't take, I remember doing some kind of a mock exam, which wasn't very good. I couldn't take an exam. It was impossible to take an exam. And when I left school, I had no friends whatsoever. When I left, I remember walking out of that school with nothing, not even a friend, a certificate, nothing. And into the big world, not knowing what to do, what job to apply for, you know, what to do at 16 years old.
So in the space of 10 years, that decision which had been taken by that teacher when you were 6 years old, to send you to this school, right? And the school basically had no prospects. They didn't have any prospects for you. They didn't look to see that this young lady, this little girl was creative. And even in that school, because based on what you were saying about doing the puppet shows, the creativity of the imagination, none of that was tapped into or recognized.
Absolutely not, because you know, I was a black child. They didn't want me to amount to anything. They wanted me to grow up and become a laborer, clean the streets, you know, and work in factories. I did try, but it was difficult for me because I was dyslexic. Now, the thing is that some children who went to that school may have gone on and, you know, and maybe in later life, in their teens, maybe they might have caught up. But because I was dyslexic, you see, putting a dyslexic child, you know, they had all these excuses to put these children into these schools. They couldn't say, oh, we're going to put them because they're black and racism and all of that. They had to have an excuse. So there were all excuses written down on our report. Mine must have been, I'm slow because I was dyslexic. So putting a slow child into a school like that is only going to make her mind retarded. You see, so when eventually I went to university and I was diagnosed with dyslexia. I was over the moon because I suddenly realized, oh my goodness, all these years I was dyslexic. You know, I'm intelligent. My right brain is bigger. The right side of my brain is a little bit bigger than the left. I'm intelligent. I just learn a different way, and I just need strategies to help me. And I was over the moon. Not knowing that it wasn't because I was dyslexic. I was suffering from a man-made condition. They put me into the school that I went to, and conditioned me not to amount to anything. They basically rewrote my destiny.
Because of
that is what they did. So I was suffering from a man-made condition. That was it. Not dyslexia. There are so many dyslexic people who leave school knowing how to read and write and go on to do great jobs and become great people. So that wasn't the problem. Because I went to that school, and because I went to that school, and because I was creative, and because I was ambitious, eventually, you know, I decided that I'm going to make my brain work. And I spent most of my time doing that because I was made semi-retarded. I was a mother by this time. If I'd gone to a proper school and been educated, I probably would have got a very good job, and taken care of my children, being there for my children when they go to school. But no, I had to focus on my education.
Mm-hmm.
I needed that time. And my children had problems and I couldn't attend to their needs as much as I wanted to. So going to that school has affected the first and third generation in my family because I went to that school. And I'm telling you, someone has to pay. They can't get away with it because this was deliberately done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even if I had a learning difficulty, I didn't deserve to be in a school like that. I don't think anybody should be made retarded in any way. You know, I don't agree with that. But
so just to fill in a few gaps for me, right?
Yes.
Because you mentioned about going to university, so I'd like to know what it was that drove you to go back and go to university, because that shows resilience and determination. But then the other thing which I'd just like to just touch on, if it's all right, is to ask, well, what was your parents, aunts, uncles, what was their position in when this was happening? Were they trying to get you out of the school? Were they encouraging you? What was happening there?
Eventually, my mother, like I told you before, my mother met up with the educational psychologist. She assessed me and she promised, and she told my mother there and then, I'll never forget the time when she said, I'm intelligent. And she said to my mother, I promise you, I will get your daughter out of this school. Okay, so with her help now, my mother was able to get me into a girls' high school. As for my aunts and uncles, I was raised in Leeds and they were raised in another county, and they were in another county, so we were on our own. But you know, I was called, you know, I remember my auntie calling me backward because I went to this school. You know, you're labeled forever. Everyone calls you that name because obviously you are 13, 14 and not reading and writing, not communicating properly, not using the words that people your age know. You know, to communicate, you know, so obviously people are going to call you dunce. That was the most famous name labeling, dunce, in the Black community. There were plenty of dunce children because they all went to this school. You see, and I was called dunce, I was called backward and all kinds of different names, and I didn't have that respect from anybody.
So you also mentioned about the fact that you then had difficulties in forming friendships because people were labeling you. So it wasn't just about they didn't take time to get to know you. They were just wearing that label. Or how would you describe it if you can? Well,
you know, you meet new people, don't you? And you get in conversations. And if you're talking to someone who really doesn't know much and can't really communicate, you're not going to move on and go and talk to someone else who you can get a decent conversation from. Well, that was the reality. I couldn't read or write. My mother taught me to read a part of the Bible, the first pages in the Bible, and I could recite that because I realized later that I'm a kinesthetic learner. When I do things over and over and over again, I remember that's what triggers my memory. But other than that, I couldn't read any other book. And still, at my age, I still can't read books the way people read books. I can only read when I'm looking for information. I've never read a book from the front page to the end of. That would just put me to sleep. I would get completely lost. You know, because because of dyslexia and because I went to this school. Okay. So yes, I forgot what you were asking.
No, the other question that's fine. The other question was that your determination that you went back to university. So how did what was that journey from being 16, leaving school with no qualifications, etc., to then going to university?
At 40, I was nearly 41.
Wow, good.
When I went to university. So I went back into education when I was about 30, about 31. And I at 30, between 29 and 30, I was in Africa, and my relationship wasn't going well, and I had to write a letter to my mother, and I couldn't write the letter the way I wanted to. I didn't have the words to express to my mother what I was going through, and to ask her to raise money for us to come back to England.
Yeah.
And I think it was at that point that I made a decision. I made a promise to God that, and I meant this with all my heart and soul, that if God can just help me to return home, I promise that I will get my brain working. And I managed to leave. Obviously, I'm here with you, and I kept that promise. It took me a while to get into to get to college, but I went to college and I did very basic. I went to college actually not the basic, but I was learning. I did a course where they were teaching you how to read and also practice my writing. And then I went on to do basic English and maths.
Right.
And I went on to do pre-access. I did so many courses. I did languages like French, English, and Spanish and French, because you get to learn the basics of English when you're studying these languages.
Yeah.
So that was one strategy I used. So every year I was in college learning something until I did GCSE English, passed with a C, and I was over the moon. Honestly, it was just amazing. Thank you. And then I decided to pursue my dreams as an actress, and I went on to do A-level performing arts. I passed with a D, but I did a lot of writing. I did some writing. My writing was improving by this time, and I studied about writing. I learned to write monologues. I sang, I danced, I performed, and then I did more acting courses, more music courses, until eventually I did so many courses. Eventually, I did an access course to music, to modern music. Yeah. And that got me into university to do a degree in Caribbean Studies and Creative Writing. And then I decided that if I wasn't going to be an actress, I would be a writer, you know. Yeah. So then I went on and I did a master's in professional writing. Then I did a postgraduate. I was teaching eventually dyslexic people like myself. I did a postgraduate in teaching dyslexics in higher and further education. So when I graduated, I worked at universities and I worked at colleges until I was made redundant. It was difficult to get a job in that field. Yeah. And I went back to university while I was working as a dyslexia tutor. I went back to university to do a master's in managing equality and diversity. But because I was made redundant, I settled for a postgraduate certificate. Yeah. But in all of this, the interesting thing is, which I put in my book, is that I became obsessed with learning. Yeah. Yeah. I became obsessed. You know, I still had the label that was written on my head as a backward person was still there. When I looked in the mirror, I could see it in my mind's eye. You know, so I became obsessed with learning. I could never be intelligent enough. Yes. Whilst I should be working, you know, looking after my family, going on holidays, treating us. Yeah. With gifts and whatever, I was spending my time studying. You see, I never really, apart from the working as a dyslexia tutor, where I was at that time, my mother had passed, about 51. Yeah. That was my real job. I never worked. Right. I did a few more jobs with agencies after that, and that was it. Yeah. And now I was doing the job in security, believe it or not, after all that education, you know, because I couldn't study for a vocational job because there's nothing out there that I can really do. I am a creative person. I'm either could have been an actress or a writer. Yeah. We all come we're all a part of this universe, and we all come to do different things.
Yeah.
Yes, there is nothing wrong with laboring jobs because someone has to do it.
Exactly.
But it wasn't going to be me, and I don't mean that in a snobbish way. I really don't.
Yeah.
And that is my story, that they not only made my mind retarded, they made my whole life retarded. And I became obsessed with learning because I went to that school.
But when I sit and I listen to your story, I am so impressed with you, right? And why I say that, because from where you were when you were 6 years old, being labeled as being slow, subnormal, etc., agendas aside, right? You were creative, and you have gone on despite all of these things and found I'm not going to say your vocation, but you found your place. If studying is what you want to do, there is absolutely nothing wrong with spending a life in study, because that's what most people at universities do. They're just studying for a passion, but fortunately they're getting paid for it at the same time, right?
Exactly.
But your story is amazing in that it shows determination. Right?
Yes.
It shows definite determination. And actually, I would say, don't wear that label. You're a lot more than what they tried to label you as a 6-year-old, right? And the labels which were going around the community, you're so much more. The fact that you studied creative writing, and I know that you've got at least one book, and I'm pretty sure another one's on the way.
Yes, my autobiography.
Your autobiography's on the way, yeah? So that in itself is, as a 6-year-old, as a 16-year-old, when you said that you couldn't read, you couldn't write, did you ever imagine that now you would have published one book and be on the verge of getting a second one done?
No.
Right? That's what I mean. So that determination is to be applauded, I know. So no, and it just amazes me, because for 6 years, 7 years, a crucial point in a young child's life, from 6 to 13, you weren't even being taught anything.
No.
Yeah?
No.
But you know what? I like the fact that although the past is there, you haven't allowed that past to really define who you were, because your determination tells me that you haven't allowed it to define you. I know that I would say, from my observations, something needs to be done to right the wrong, which I think was perpetrated against you. And that's what Bernard Cord's book kind of highlighted back then, when he wrote it in 1971, and highlighted how the West Indian child was being made subnormal by the British education system. Yeah, that's effectively what they did with you, but you are not. Yeah. So in that fight, in that passion, what would you like to see happen now?
Well, regards to me, what happened to me, I would like a national apology for what happened. I mean, at the moment, I'm talking to my solicitor about applying, trying to claim compensation for what happened. But at the same time, honestly, I would like an apology to all the children that went through that system and were made educationally subnormal, because I know many of them, it has destroyed their lives. Many, not all people are determined, and I've yet to meet, I just know the two that was on the documentary. And also, as well, I do know it's still going on. My son went to SCN school. It's still going on with Black children. There are many children, Black children in this country, who are doing very well at school, but there's also the minority who are being labeled, and not given that support. They're not willing to put put more teachers in class to help children who need that extra support. As soon as there is disturbance, they want to take that child out and put them into a SEN school. So it's still going on. There's racism still going on. And, you know, we are a part of this country. We're not going anywhere. Yes?
Yeah.
We're not going anywhere. Our blood, our ancestors' blood helped to build this country. And we have fought their wars. And after they fighting their wars, we still came back to help them to build the economy. And we're still here building the economy. Our footprints, our fingerprints and footprints are in the soil of British soil, and we are not going anywhere, you know. So we, I don't know how we're going to erase racism from this country, because we have to learn to live together, because we're not going anywhere.
That's right.
Yes, the government, and it's the government, you know. I know laws are they implemented to, you know, to combat racism, but it's still there, and it's about education, and you know, it's about education. Some of us have gone back to the Caribbean or decided to migrate back, to go back to Africa, but some people will remain here. And I think it also, we in the Black communities as well, we need to work more together, you know, to help ourselves. And I think that's happening. That is happening anyway. But as for white racism, as for systematic racism, I would like to see it erased from this country. Something has to be done to stop the racism. Something has to be done. We didn't start it, but maybe we have to go on marches about it. Go to, you know, to the Prime Minister and discuss this, you know, go in groups and discuss the racism that are happening to us, even though we didn't start it, because we deserve to be wherever we want to be. There are white people in South Africa, Australia, all these countries were all Black. You know, they, you know, Europeans can go where they want and live happily. You know, we also as Black people need to live wherever we want and not experience racism.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm going to, we could sit and talk for hours. I always say this, but your story is just so powerful. And thank you so much for sharing. I'm just going to, as is my normal custom, to ask if there are any questions in the audience. If anyone would like to ask a question, if you'd like to raise your hand. Otherwise, I've got another couple questions, which I wouldn't mind just asking. I don't see anyone's hands raised. Okay, so I'm gonna crack on with another question. All right, just with regards then, just with regards to, you have made a big contribution as far as I'm concerned, because I remember seeing the documentary that the BBC did in, I think it was in May of this year, when it was actually aired on national TV, and it was a chilling. It wasn't something which I didn't know about. I did know about it. I had read about the Bernard Cord's book. I had read, and it was something which I had known about. But to have somebody who had lived through that experience was very powerful. And the way in which you've actually articulated your story today, again, has even more reinforced the unfairness of that situation. And we do want you to get some kind of redress for it, because it wasn't right then, it isn't right now, and it should never be right. I'm just thinking, if you had an opportunity now to have a conversation with your 16-year-old self, what advice would you have given your 16-year-old self about how life would pan out, or what they could do?
Well, that is a good question that I would have to think about. I've done that same activity going back to when I was a little child, in order to love myself because and try to gain some confidence and self-esteem, because when you go to a school like I did and you leave school without no qualifications, nothing, and you grow up with no, you continue to get older and lack at the same time. You're getting older, but you still lack confidence and self-esteem, and you know. And I had to go back as a child to give myself a hug. You know, and it was like looking into a crystal ball and seeing the future. You know, that child could see that the future, that she was going to go through all of this. You know, what I was experiencing, and I had to give myself a hug as a little girl and say, "I love you." You know, everything's going to be all right. But to go back at 16 is so. To go back at 16 to advise myself. You know, because at 16, it was difficult at that period. You know, you talked about the 70s, where racism was no better than, was not lesser than the way it was in the 40s.
Sorry. The sound has gone. Is it just me? Can anyone else hear?
No, I can't hear either.
Can't hear either.
Okay, I'm not quite sure why. Maisie, the sound just stopped out.
Yes, I don't know why.
Okay, it's back now.
Yeah.
Back. Oh, yeah.
Right. So to go back as I am now as an adult, to advise myself as a 16-year-old in a time where there was very little I could do, it's very difficult. Do you understand? It's easier for me to go back to that 6-year-old and give myself a hug.
Yeah. Yeah.
Than to as an adult now, with the experience I have, to go back into that period and advise that 16-year-old. It was very difficult. I can't do that. I don't know. I just can't. I can't do it. It was a time where it's like my wings were snipped. It was cut off. I didn't have wings to fly. I didn't have the opportunities.
Yeah.
I would have known what to say to someone like me, you know, who can't read and write, who couldn't think analytically, you know, this dance child who's now 16-year-old, a dance teenager.
Okay. No. That, I think what I'm going to say, you gave yourself a hug at 6 to let them know that's good. I think when you're putting it into context of the things which you were experiencing, you said that it was like your wings had been clipped.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm just thinking to myself, it's kind of like a phoenix rising out of the ashes to say that, all right, they may have clipped your wings now, but you will rise up. You will rise. I will rise. You will rise. Okay. You will get there, right? It's going to take work. It's going to take time, but you will get there because of your determination. That's the message that I've got from your story today.
Well, thank you. And it's very beautiful, and I wish I had thought of it, but
no,
I just couldn't.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Because I'm thinking about the environment, and I'm thinking of how I was feeling at that time.
Yeah. And
maybe I couldn't, because no one did come to me and tell me that one day your dreams will come true.
Yeah.
There was no one, not even my mother. There was no one in the church. I think I started to go to church at that time when I was 16.
Yeah.
And I don't think they realized what was happening. You know, we were very ignorant. We didn't realize racism, especially in the church, because everything, once you're in the church, you're singing, you're praising God, everything's fine. You don't get involved in politics or what is really happening, you know. So there was no one to really advise me, but I did meet someone. I did meet a young lady who she was about 19 at the time, And she was the one who encouraged me to go to college with her. And she filled in the form for me, because, to be honest, at 16, I did try to go to college. It must have been in my mind that I needed to go to college to do something. And I did try, and I couldn't fill out the form. So I couldn't do anything. But I met a friend when I was about 16, between up to 17, and she helped me to fill out the form, and I went to do a copy typist course, so I can type. Because of that, that helped me in later life to type my essays.
Fantastic.
And yes. So
yeah. I'm just going to read something from the chat, which was from one of the guests. It says, Maisie,
okay.
It says, Maisie, thank you for sharing your story. I applaud your stamina and graciousness. You are an inspiration. Just keep on keeping on. Right? So that was...
Thank you.
Yeah.
A gentleman or a lady?
A lady.
Well, thank you, my sister. You know, I can never give up. I will keep on moving on until the day I die, and even then in heaven I'll keep on moving as well. I will never stop. I will never stop.
Yeah.
Never stop.
Maisie, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on this afternoon.
Thank you.
Your story is very powerful. Very, very, very powerful, and it's a story that really does need to be told, because I don't think many people realize the impact that decisions which are being made on young children, and the types of decision and how that can have a lasting impact on their lives, and your story
and their children's lives as well.
Children's lives.
Yes.
Yeah, and your story just highlighted those things and helps us to recognize we must do better. All of us must do better, because there is so much that we as a community must realize and work together to make it better for those who may not have understood or maybe think in a different way. Right? There's nothing wrong with having differences. That's what makes us all unique.
Exactly.
Yeah? That's what makes us all unique. And it's actually having different perspectives makes us stronger, not weaker.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I really just want to say a big thank you. I know that anyone who's got access to the chat, if you want, please take a look. Maisie has a book out called The Truth. Africans Against Homeland Continued. It's in the chat. There's a link to it. So please have a look at Maisie's book. And I know that she's currently working on her autobiography. So we're waiting with bated breath, Maisie, because that's a story that I would love to read and share it with many people. So Maisie, I just want to give you another big thank you, or just say another big thank you for sharing your time with us and your story with us this afternoon.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. It was an honor to be in your presence. Thank you so much for inviting me.
The pleasure was truly mine. Okay. I'm going to just let people know what's happening.
Apparently the link is not there. I just saw a message.
Let me have a look. It's all right. I'll put it again. It may be that they came in afterwards, so let me just link it up. Sorry. As I tell everyone, there you go. It should be there for everyone now. What I will do is just let everyone know what's happening for next week.
Okay.
Yeah. So once again, a big thank you, Maisie.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Right. For next week, we're going to be we'll have Nasheen Tarek, who's the postgraduate educational manager at Imperial College, and she will be sharing her story with us next week. So that will be another really interesting story. And if you haven't seen the previous interviews, you can see them on our YouTube site, which is tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO. So please if you want to attend, or if you haven't seen any of those, please have a look, or come and join us next week and listen to the conversation which we'll be having then. All I can say is, once again, Maisie, another really big thank you. If there's anyone who wants to stay on and have a little after party, then please feel free. But for the rest, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.